Hello and welcome to today's CDCT Live. I'm Jason Rader, your host. Today's topic is data mobility. Do you need it? And with me today, we have architect Ryan Marks and principal architect Tim Cook to talk about this topic. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So for the uninitiated, data mobility, what is it? What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, I'll go first and then you can go, Ryan. Data mobility is in the modern age, as people start looking at utilizing public cloud, hybrid cloud, they've realized that, hey, we've got these centers of data, as we like to call it, and that's really, where their business drives value. And it's easy to move their computer around, but they quickly realize, oh crap, we move our compute out to the cloud, but we've got all our data on-prem. That doesn't really work out. So really, how do we make sure that our data is able to move to where our compute is at?
Yeah, it's, how do we adjust, as we grow and scale through the organization, those legacy, centers of data, the data gravity that we often see, where's all the data, flowing to, where's it housing, and then how do we get that out to the edge, to closest to the application, to the users in the most efficient manner.
No, I like that. And so the promise that the cloud brings us, right, is that, data everywhere. So shouldn't we be putting our data all over the place in this, to rip it out of the data centers and stick it in all the public clouds? Is that the way we're rolling here? That sounds like some CIOs. I think I've heard say that before.
Yeah, infinite scale. What could go wrong? You can do that. One of the problems I think people find, right? A lot of times you're going to have confidential information there. You're going to have, whether it's PII or whatever. Customers don't necessarily want to hear that. Yeah, we've got 47 copies of it spread across 800 data centers, right? So you run into a lot of challenges if you go that route. Where is it getting backed up? Are we making sure that it's encrypted where it needs to be? Are we making sure that especially in today's age where companies are international, you've got to worry about things like GDPR. So ensuring that you aren't just spreading data everywhere, that you do know where it's at, that you do have your arms around it, is extremely important. And as you talked about, we started with shadow IT and developers just throwing stuff in the cloud. Well, that's great, again, from a compute perspective, but all of a sudden somebody finds out, well, wait, you had customer credit card numbers open on an S3 bucket. Like, that doesn't work for us. So totally something that drives some of these data mobility questions.
Right. So without hijacking the topic here, it sounds like data governance is something you have to have kind of in play before the data mobility, or in conjunction with the data mobility conversation.
You absolutely must have a strategy in place for, where your data is going to live, who's going to manage it, who's going to govern it. How do you get the organization buy-in to manage that data as a whole and own it together? So
nice. So what's the promise? So data mobility done right, what's the promise here? What do we get?
Well, I think the promise is, and I still don't know that we're quite there, but the perfect world, the paradise, we can just have our data where it can run so that we have the cheapest compute possible, right? That's really one of the drivers of cloud. One of the original visions was, hey, if AWS is cheaper on Monday and Azure is cheaper on Tuesday, I just move my compute to wherever that's at. Well, again, one of the problems we found is, hey, if my data is stuck in AWS, I've moved all my compute to Azure. And I think it's something Ryan's going to touch on at some point. But now all of a sudden we've got a ton of financial considerations because, the dirty little word egress charges come into play. So if you've got a ton of data sitting in another cloud and you want to pull all that data out, you tend to have pretty hefty bills.
Right. That's kind of leading into vendor lock-in too. If you're too heavily into one cloud provider, how mobile is it to move over to that other cloud provider for maybe a cost perspective that the business has made a decision on? A lot of times applications can get coded too heavily on those providers' specific features. So how do you, and oftentimes you'll have multiple copies of that application living in two different places, and how do you account for that from a financial sense? Or even from an infrastructure or a technical, you're managing two separate infrastructures at the same time.
That's interesting. I've noticed, the cloud providers make it really easy to come on in. And that's when the ingress doesn't seem to be the concern for obvious reasons from their perspective. It's the egress. And then, so if we're talking about that mobility and we're talking about moving from one public cloud to another, from an app perspective or a data perspective, or with apps running in multiple clouds, but data moving to different public clouds, that's where the gotcha comes into play, right?
For sure. And I think, that's one of the things you have to take into consideration. It may be that a certain public cloud provider has a specific service because they are all better at certain things and worse at certain things. There may be a public cloud provider that's a clear winner for you in your business for a given as a service or a specific service inside of that cloud. And so you may be okay with your data living in that public cloud, but then you need to ensure kind of upfront, again, all the things we talked about, your data governance, but more importantly, planning for, 5 years down the road, somebody else comes up with a service I like better. To Ryan's point, do I have it in a format? Do I have a plan in place ahead of time so that I can port that back out and get it into another cloud provider without, essentially complete lock-in, right? My application is written in such a way that it's calling storage in such a way that only that cloud provider will provide. And a lot of times there's other software vendors you can bring in to kind of put it in a shim in between your application where the data lives to kind of act as a translation layer, things like that. So there are ways to get around it, but you just really have to think about it up front, because at the end of the day, if you try and stick the shim in 2 years down the road when you've got 50 petabytes of data, that's going to be a lot harder move than if you had done it up front.
Mm-hmm.
So Ryan, talk to me about like the thought process related to this, because it sounds like from what we've already talked about that the technology is continuing to evolve, right? There's new approaches, it sounds like, that are on the horizon to solve maybe some of these problems that are going on. What are we doing now? What are clients wanting to do now to prepare themselves for, leveraging this, but also so that they can be safe in the event that things are potentially going to change moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of organizations adopt a multi-cloud strategy, developing their applications in a very standardized format, so where they can live in any cloud at any particular time. But on the backside of that, with the storage, we're looking at cloud attached storage or cloud adjacency in like co-location facilities that have high-speed links to these cloud providers that virtually live across the street from, Microsoft and Google and AWS. So you can place your storage there and have it directly connect to the application you have in any cloud. That helps with you maintaining control of that data, but also in a portable format that you can go to any cloud at any time.
That sounds awesome.
And I just to add on to that, one of the things Ryan touched on that I think is important for a lot of enterprises, because, if you're building a startup, you probably don't have a lot of needs that have already been predefined based on a legacy, maybe 10, 15, 20, 50 years of operating. Being able to bring your own storage, a lot of times there's features and functionality that, if you move up the chain, if I'm a CIO, I don't necessarily care about the bits and bytes of a specific piece of technology. When you talk to the actual guys in the trenches, there's a lot of things that some of that on-premises storage does today that the cloud providers still can't provide. They don't have that ability, just based on the way that they scale and maybe some of the diverse requirements they have. So having that ability to kind of bring your own, you don't lose some of those features and functionality. And there can be a pretty big trade-off there. And again, it's one of those things where, if I'm an executive, I expect my guys to figure that out. But at the same time, sometimes it just can't be solved. There's kind of this misconception that anything I can do on-prem today, I can do in the cloud. It's not a big deal. And the reality is just the way that the cloud is architected, the public cloud is architected, a lot of times there's features and functionality that you're just going to have to give up. And some companies might not be willing to do that. And that's really where, to Ryan's point, that cloud adjacent can be really attractive.
And you can continue to leverage your existing investments as long as they're, still on the books, and continue to build that out.
Yeah, that's a really interesting solution I hadn't thought too much about. And I think, one of the complexities here is, and I think CIOs like that, the ones that I work with, like these very kind of concise things. We're either going to the cloud or we're not, or we're either doing this or we're not. And so it's really everybody's job, certainly our jobs, to educate them on, hey, sometimes it's better to keep this in the data center, regulatory requirements or the legacy apps that run where it runs. Sometimes, it's going to be a hybrid solution. And I think that's that level of complexity. We got to be confident to kind of express that. And when I say we, I'm talking about folks watching, to their executives, to their leadership, because that's okay. And it's actually a better solution, maybe that mixed solution in a lot of cases.
For sure. I think a lot of the businesses that I work with, they've kind of gotten to a point where at this point, cloud is just another arrow in the quiver, right? It's another tool to accomplish an end goal. And they've stopped viewing it as like an all or nothing. And they've started to go pick and choose, like, this is going to be amazing in the cloud. This is going to cause us a ton of pain and be really expensive. And you may decide, hey, even though it's more painful, we're still going to put it out there because the short-term pain is better than having to manage two disparate, go-to-market operation-wise. But a lot of them have just said, hey, we're always going to have both, and there's going to be advantages and disadvantages to both, and we're going to pick and choose applications. And obviously, the newer stuff they're developing, they're trying to really target to more of that cloud model. But for most businesses, there's legacy there, like we talked about before, that it's going to remain, and you're just going to have a dual-pronged approach.
Yeah, some apps are, optimized for the cloud. Some aren't. Legacy hardware being a big part of that too.
Sure. And I mean, sometimes it's not worth the re-platform. I mean, especially like you just said, right?
Yeah, a lot of times you just have to look, what is the actual business value here, right? The story of public cloud is awesome, and it can absolutely make a ton of sense. But a lot of times, if you look at the cost to actually get there, right? We always hear the horror stories of somebody that decided to re-platform their ERP, and it's 10 years later and $300 million, and they still haven't really gotten there. So that can absolutely happen with a cloud migration or transition as well if you aren't really doing that work up front. Again, data mobility being one of the keys to that.
Yeah, I've seen some tragedies involving situations like that. And it's like, I mean, $100 million in, we're like scrapping it. I'm like, it hurts, when you come into a situation, something like that. Yeah. So let's talk about those challenges. I think, we talked about, what are some of the caveats as we talk about data mobility? So I joked at the onset, like, let's do it all. Let's copy it everywhere. Let's talk about those challenges, guys.
Ryan, I think you're living and breathing this right now, so you could probably start.
The sprawl, if you go into the cloud, you can experience financial sprawl, not managing the environment, optimize, keeping it lean, because if you leave services running, it's costing you by the hour, by the day as it turns. It's as you go to the cloud, you look at the experience. Can your staff handle this? Do you have the right staff to do this? So invest in your people, invest in the training to do that. You lose some of the familiarity by going to the cloud a little bit, by wholly going to the cloud. Where hybrid, you can still retain some of that familiarity of the equipment that you have owned for years and continue to leverage those investments. You avoid some vendor lock-in by being able to kind of go multi-cloud if you can, but if you go one or the other, you're forcing yourself into a corner, so to speak. Also in technical sprawl too, so you can have virtual machines or containers and things like that begin to sprawl away, and your environment just becomes too large to manage, resulting in more FTEs, going back to the financial aspects of it too.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I just tag on there, just to maybe put it in layman's terms, I think the biggest thing there is unplanned cost, right? When you're paying by the drink, a lot of times companies are used to making that CapEx purchase at the start of a 5-year cycle. And, there's going to be smaller chunks that they're going to bite off along the way, but we've paid for that. It's, it's done. We're good for X number of years. And, as you kind of unleash that whole, hey, it's unlimited. Well, it's unlimited, so guys can keep consuming more and more and more, and maybe aren't paying as close of attention, because back when they're on premises, a lot of times there's over provisioning there that, you can kind of cheat a little bit on premises and show people more storage than maybe they really have, that sort of thing. And when you're doing that in the cloud, you're paying for every last bit and byte, and the cheating kind of goes away, right? The accounting is very upfront. And so I think a lot of companies, if they aren't very strict, to Ryan's point, if the staff hasn't been trained on, you need to be very thoughtful in what you're doing here, they get some surprise bills. That's never fun.
Yeah.
And I think early on when we started talking about stuff like this, like the sticker shock on the monthly bill kind of thing coming in, it was typically where people were starting to engage a single public cloud provider. But now we've got folks that have multiple public cloud providers in the mix. And, again, I seem to be the governance guy today, but that cloud governance that needs to come into play of like how we allow people to instantiate things within the cloud and to store in the cloud is something that folks need to pay attention to, especially when it's going across multiple providers.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire software industry built around helping people unwind their public cloud bills and managing them across a multi-cloud strategy, right? It's great that you can do it, but having to go through line item by line item on bills to figure out who's using what can be painful too. And obviously, as the cloud providers mature, that gets easier and easier. But even today, you have to, again, be very thoughtful about that up front to ensure that you're not getting those surprise bills.
Absolutely.
So is there an easy button, guys?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Okay, so the answer is no. That's all you have to say.
It depends. It depends. It takes a lot of upfront planning, discussion, discovery to understand one's environment inside and out, frontwards and back, to make sure that we know all the interdependencies of how your applications work, who they talk to, how your users are consuming that, to then you once you have all that data, you can begin to form a strategy to make a move to the cloud. It's not a easy button to hit and it's done. It's a very thoughtful process that does take some time to do correctly the first time, and it's a living and breathing process too. It changes over time, just like the business.
And I think that's the right answer for sure. I think, but what you said actually makes the implementation and the execution a lot easier if you've done all of that upfront strategy and understanding of your environment and your applications and your data and what you're trying to accomplish. The worst thing for somebody to say is, we want data mobility, we're moving everything to the cloud. Well, why? Well, because that's the thing. They've got to have some type of plan beyond it's the flavor of the day or it's the thing that's going to look cool. But I do agree, man, all of that planning. And what I didn't want to interrupt you, but right at the beginning where you're like understanding all of the resources and the things that are involved, how many people in a normal environment do? That's a small percentage. It's kind of like people are like, yeah, we're covered with BCDR or whatever. And really, are you? Are you though? So there's a lot of know thyself that's involved in this. And it's not the sexy public cloud part. It's hey, what are all the resources that are being used? What are the dependencies on all of those things that folks have to think about?
For sure. I mean, that's kind of why you got the chuckle out of me, right? The data mobility part and getting there potentially, but it's that day zero, that step zero that you really need to truly understand your environment as it sits today. And no offense to anybody, because most businesses are complex, and doing the work to maintain a map like that, there isn't necessarily a ton of business value in that. But when you start looking at, hey, we want to start moving this stuff, that's when, hey, there's a very prescriptive business value here of there's reasons I want to get to the public cloud. To your point, Jason, you have to have a good reason. But once you've discovered that reason, then there's a very purposeful business value to mapping where your data lives, how your applications interact with it, and ensuring that, I didn't decide, hey, this application is going to the cloud, and I forgot that there was 4 databases in the back end that it was talking to that are still living on premises. Like, you don't want to get stuck in that situation. So you absolutely have to do that work up front.
So Ryan, with the question we asked in the title of the session was, do you need it? What are the clients that you're working with have decided, please no names, but what are the types of clients that have decided that they need it? What are the use cases that we're talking about here?
For the immediate use case that we're working on right now is a client has a multiple cloud provider, 2 different clouds, and they have storage on-prem, and they replicate that storage to both the clouds. That becomes very expensive for them to maintain 3 copies of the data. So what we're doing now is that cloud adjacent, cloud attached storage in a co-location facility where they can leverage the applications very specific to each cloud provider and reference that data simultaneously between the 2 clouds.
Got it. So they decided they needed data mobility. They went about it kind of in a way that now they're trying to get that cost optimization and that better solution in place.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're pulling that data back out and maintaining that themselves and providing it to whoever, wherever they need it.
How many folks do you think are in this bucket? To me, it seems like there's a lot of folks that are probably going to be looking at this very soon.
Yes, I think if you have any kind of cloud presence, it's worth taking a look at that model, most certainly. And
are all the major providers kind of in this game, or is it kind of a niche? as far
I
as the
think
storage folks?
A lot of the major storage providers are doing this today. They have a model that's often well documented to help support a hybrid cloud attached storage model.
For sure. From what I've seen, every one of the major players, right? If you had asked me a year and a half ago, there was one or two. And as you know,
That's what I was saying. A year and a half ago, it was like one or two players, and now it seems like everybody's playing this game.
Everybody. Yeah.
They absolutely are.
And that also kind of brings a situation which makes, folks who are, understand the full business solution that we're trying to deliver cringe a little bit when sometimes the providers are like, here's your easy button, buy this product. But we just talked about all of the things that potentially you have to unravel to make this work. And that's where folks like you guys come in and help, right?
Yeah, I would look at anybody skeptically that says there's an easy button that, hey, you just install this one piece of software and your life is going to be perfect. It is absolutely a journey. It's not something where, even from our perspective, we're never going to come in and say this one piece of software, you click a button and you can magically be in the cloud, right? There's a lot of additional work there. And again, going back to the business and ensuring that they're prepared for it, that your applications are prepared for it. There's a lot of legwork that needs to be done up front. The other thing I'd say too, from a data mobility perspective that we've seen as both the storage providers and just application providers have matured is we've started to build in functionality to help you migrate from one cloud to the other. That doesn't get you away from the financial penalties of moving a ton of data from one to the other. But, there are absolutely software packages and specific storage appliances and things that may leverage cloud on the back end and will actually support you migrating on the back end if, you decide that, hey, we've signed an enterprise agreement with a new cloud provider and we need to move everything over there. There are absolutely ways to do that. Now, again, it's not going to get you away from the financial penalties, but from being able to move seamlessly, that we're starting to get there, even if you are putting all that data in the public cloud and not doing kind of that adjacent or even hybrid strategy.
Right. Yeah, they're developing easy buttons, so to speak, in certain cases. So just, all those considerations keep in mind, as you move between clouds and going to the cloud. So all those still play.
Nice.
Definitely getting better.
Yeah, getting better.
No, and I think it's exciting because, like we had said, a year ago it was a different story, and a year from now it's going to continue to evolve. So we'll probably have to talk about this thing again. Any final thoughts for the folks out there? I mean, this is exciting. I think the understanding is there. The opportunity to optimize is definitely something that probably everybody's thinking about now. They're like, I'm probably in a situation like this. Any thoughts for those folks?
If you're in the cloud, you're likely evaluating your costs on a routine basis. Hopefully, consider hybrid models. Understanding your environment is probably the most important aspect to any journey to the cloud or any cloud model, hybrid even. Knowing where your data lives, where you want your users or applications to consume them efficiently and with high performance, obviously. So yeah, just discovery, planning, and then ultimately execution.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, right, as I touched on before, I think viewing the cloud as a arrow in that quiver is probably the best way to approach it for most companies. There are some that are going to be all in and for all sorts of great reasons. And I think, to me, that legwork up front, ensuring that if you are going to kind of pursue that journey, that you do the legwork up front, that you don't just go, we're going to move stuff and then figure it out. That's probably the worst possible way you can do it. And then just trying to ensure as you're developing next gen applications, like we talked about again before, making sure that you're building it in such a way that it will be portable, right? Because today you may be in love with a certain provider and 3 years from now you may hate them, and you want to ensure that you're not just kind of trapped because of the fact that your data is in a format and your applications are accessing it in such a way that you don't have any options. So, always keeping that in the back of your head of, I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to have this run in the best location possible, and that I'm not so reliant on a specific service that, I'm trapped there.
No, I think that's great. And again, that's perfect for folks who are watching. And by the way, we love all your comments and those kinds of things. But, having those things in the back of your mind, it's going to take some upfront, investment, understanding your organization so that you can do this properly. And then as you, are out there acquiring additional technologies or developing new applications, the things that you have to think about or should be thinking about in order to make this the journey an easier journey for you moving forward.
For sure.
Yep.
Brian, Tim, you guys rock. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
If you guys out there would love to hear more about what we do here, please visit us at insightcdct.com. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.